Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, or good night, depending on what time of day you're watching this. Good afternoon here. This is chapter 6 of Converging Media. And I'll tell you the same thing about this chapter that I could probably tell you about chapter 7, which is about the impact of social media. Many of you probably may have more interaction, more knowledge, especially of the video games. Might be more qualified to teach some of this chapter than I am, but it's my job, so I'm going to do it. It talks about the historical development of user interfaces. The first term with the television, we didn't use the term user interface, but what happened was after television has been invented, there was the knob, you turn the channel, then remote controls came along in which you could interact with the computer without having to get up and do it. And then, of course, the world of computers came along. And what happened was, in addition to being able to change the station with your remote control, you began to as they started to put computers and that kind of technology into the TVs, the smart televisions, you began to be able to interact with them on a different level, on a computer level. You can surf the internet on your smart TV, other things along that line. The remote control changed viewing habits. There was a time where if the networks had you at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, whatever the start of your prime time was, most people would watch it and they'd watch the next show and the next show. The next show wouldn't necessarily get up and change the channel. Once the remote control came along, all of a sudden, it was an easy change to the different channel, to a different network. A strong lead-in program for a network's night did not necessarily guarantee that they would have you the rest of the night. And so that changed TV a lot. As we went forward into VHS tapes and then later the DVR, viewing habits changed as well. The ability to fast forward through commercials, the ability to avoid commercials back when you could, with a remote control, change to another channel and come back. It talks about intuitive interfaces. There's the keyboards, computer, mouses, touchscreen, and other things like natural input methods like natural handwriting and voice recognition. My new Galaxy Note 10 Plus, I can write on it. With my handwriting, I can write on it, and then I can tell that page to turn it into type and make it into a document. So that changes everything. I can also dictate to it. I can say things, have it, put it in there, make that into a document. All these things have changed, drastically changed our ability to interact with computers. Back in the 80s, whatever it was, Star Trek 4. Star Trek came to Earth, and what they did was they went back in time into the 80s. And I remember the engineer, Scotty, I think it was trying to work with a computer to teach this guy how to make a special steel that would help out Star Trek in terms of getting back to the future. And he walks out the computer and he goes, computer. And of course, the guy's saying, what are you doing? You have to use the mouse. Well, that's no longer true. That world that they envisioned on Star Trek, in which you told the computer things to do, that's here now. You can talk to your laptops, you can talk to your cell phones. My cell phone has more computing power than my first computer, which cost me $2,500. It has far more computing power than that desktop computer with a monitor and a color printer had. Talks about graphic user interfaces. They started, audio, video. They really transformed what you could show on computers. How small, like your phones can do things. I have a Fitbit on. It can do things that you couldn't do on your computer a number of years back. Talks about the historical development of internet and the World Wide Web. Internet protocol. There's the TCP, the Transmission Control Protocol. The World Wide Web, it has hypertext transfer protocols and other things. I'm not going to get into that. This is not a class in that. If this is a class in that, we can get into that. This is about mass communication, how it impacts your life, and how to maybe keep it from doing that a little bit. So we're going to go forward through this. Talked about web browsers and, of course, broadband width and how that affects your browsing and your viewing. Going forward, we're going to jump forward and talk a little bit about the decentralization of distribution. Means a loss of control for media companies. So now, for instance, I knew someone who has, last I heard, 2 or 3 terabytes of music on their computer, although it's probably on a passport drive or something. and literally hundreds of thousands of songs, probably, most of which had been downloaded from somewhere free. That just changed a lot of things. And I talked about video games, whole different kinds of video games as they came forward. They were very, very basic. I remember playing Pong. The little ball bounced back and forth. And then along came Atari. And along came all these other things, Pac-Man in the arcades and other things along that way. We had the Atari 2600. I wish I'd bought one, left it in the box because they're worth thousands now, if they're in the box still, especially. Nintendo, others came along. What happened was, because of the way computers started making everything, miniaturizing everything and making the components smaller, they started being able to do more and more things in a video game. You can play video games on this right now that are far more complex than anything ever played on an Atari 2600. It's just a cell phone. Anyway, but Xbox and Xbox 360 were leaps forward in terms of some of the realism, the really, literally, you're looking at someone on the screen that looks like better than some of the old computer-generated images back in the days of the early Star Wars. Different types of video games came along. We're not going to get into all of that. Social games where you can play games on Facebook and things along that line. Different video game companies. Games have changed a great deal. There's the first-person shooter games. There are games where you try to take over the world virtually, build your own little empire. Talks about gamification, the use of game-like mechanics and thinking in a non-game setting. A lot of companies now, there are companies out there who have certain things they need done. They want people who are good at video games. I've actually read that if you're very, very good at video games, you might want to contact the Army. They might want to recruit you. Talked about augmented reality and virtual reality. There was originally overlays of digitized information onto what we see in the real world. We see that on televisions and our phones, all kinds of things today. Virtual reality actually replaced the real world with a digitized virtual one. You have these things where you see they're wearing these things and they're looking at a virtual reality thing that's going on. What are the ethics of interactive media? There's a question for you. What are the ethics of interactive media? There's a certain faith in other people you have to have. There's a lot of fake names and fake identities people have out there. People pretend to be someone that they're not. There's trolling that happens where people try to get other people to say things. They say very provocative things, trying to create angry reactions in other people. And of course, there's violence in video games. It's a major concern. It's one of the things that is some people feel is contributing to the violence in society today. Is it? You know, a lot of people would say no, but is it? I don't know. Anyway, looking at media careers, innovators with a new idea. One of the fastest ways to become a billionaire is think up a good website that you could use that might get a lot of people to go to the website. Once you cross a few million people and they're heading up into the tens of millions, all of a sudden someone decides they want to buy you out and they make you a multi-billion-dollar offer. So anyway, creative writing is valued. It doesn't really matter. I mean, any chapter of this book where it talks about possible media careers, if you are a good writer, you can make your way into a media career. It's a very valuable resource, something that is needed. Even if you want to become like an entertainment or sports commentator and news person along that line, a lot of those people, the really top ones, some of the top ones do a lot of their own writing. So you have to be aware of that. Of course, looking back and moving forward, a lot of the video game industry is consolidated. A lot of the video game industry is on cell phones now. And all of this is changing rapidly because technology is changing so rapidly right now. We're in 2020, the year 2020. And the technology is changing so rapidly that you'll buy, they say that if you buy a computer right now, in 2 years, it's outdated. That's what I read. But that's the end of that chapter.